They said Dylan Thorne was too big to fail. They said his empire, Thorne Dynamics, was the bedrock of American innovation. But it took less than 8 hours for the king of Wall Street to become a pauper. It didn't start with a market crash, and it didn't start with a lawsuit. It started with a red dress, a glass of champagne, and a woman who walked out of the most exclusive gala in New York City without saying a single word. By the time the sun rose over the Hudson, Dylan Thorne didn't just lose his wife, he lost his soul. This is the true story of the most expensive divorce in history, orchestrated in silence. The air inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art smelled of old money and expensive perfume. It was the first Monday in May, and the annual gala was in full swing, a swirling kaleidoscope of silk, diamonds, and the flash of paparazzi cameras. At the center of it all stood Dylan Thorne. At 42, Dylan was the picture of modern American power. He was the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, a defense and logistics conglomerate that had recently secured a $4 billion contract with the Pentagon. He wore a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars, and on his wrist sat a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. He was laughing at a joke made by a senator, his teeth white and predatory. On his arm was Audrey. Audrey Thorne, formerly Audrey Vance, was 34, though her porcelain skin and wide violet eyes made her look ageless. Tonight, she was wearing a custom crimson gown by Versace, structured and sharp, that made her look less like a wife and more like a weapon. The press called her the Silent Muse. She rarely gave interviews. She rarely spoke in public. She simply stood by Dylan, smiling that enigmatic, terrifyingly perfect smile. "Smile, darling," Dylan whispered, his hand tightening imperceptibly on her waist as a photographer from Vanity Fair leaned in. "Senator Graham is watching." Audrey turned to the camera. She didn't just smile, she radiated. But anyone looking closely, truly closely, would have seen the tremor in her hand as she held her champagne flute. "I need some air, Dylan," she said softly. Her voice was low, melodic, and barely audible over the din of the string quartet playing in the background. Dylan frowned, checking his watch. It was 10:14 p.m. "Don't be long. We have the table with the investors at 10:30. The BlackRock representatives are dying to meet you." "I'll be 5 minutes," she promised. She pulled her arm away from his. The loss of contact was sudden, leaving a cold spot on Dylan's tuxedo sleeve. He watched her walk away, the red train of her dress carving a path through the crowd, like a wound opening up in the water. She nodded to a few acquaintances, a nod to Anna Wintour, a brief smile at a famous tech billionaire from Silicon Valley, and then she turned the corner toward the Temple of Denda. That was the last time Dylan Thorne ever saw his wife. The timeline, reconstructed later by the NYPD and private investigators, was precise. At 10:17 p.m., Audrey entered the ladies' lounge near the Egyptian wing. At 10:21 p.m., a woman exited the lounge. She was wearing a grey custodial uniform, pushing a laundry cart. She kept her head down, a blue cap pulled low. The security cameras, usually state-of-the-art, had experienced a glitch in that specific corridor for exactly 90 seconds. At 10:25 p.m., the custodial worker exited the museum through the service loading dock on 80th Street. A black sedan, bearing diplomatic plates that were later found to be forged, was waiting. Inside the ballroom, Dylan grew impatient. At 10:45 p.m., he sent a text. "Where are you? The investors are sitting." No reply. At 11 p.m., his irritation turned to anger. He excused himself, flashing a charming, apologetic grin to the table. "My wife seems to have been waylaid by the art," he joked. The table laughed. Dylan marched toward the restrooms, his jaw set. He asked a female attendant to check the lounge. "Mr. Thorne?" the attendant said, emerging 2 minutes later, looking confused. "There's no one in there. Just this." She held up a clutch. It was Audrey's Judith Lieber crystal bag, shaped like a rose. Dylan snatched it. Inside there was no phone, no wallet, just a single playing card, the Queen of Spades, and a napkin with a lipstick stain. Dylan felt a prickle of unease, but his ego suppressed it immediately. She was being dramatic. She had probably slipped out to smoke, or perhaps she had felt ill and taken a cab back to their penthouse at 432 Park Avenue without telling him. It was a power play. She wanted him to worry. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. He returned to the table, ordered a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon, and charmed the investors for another 2 hours. He was Dylan Thorne. He controlled satellites. He controlled markets. He could certainly control one wayward wife. He left the gala at 1:00 a.m. His driver, a burly ex-marine named Cole, opened the door of the Maybach. "Home, sir. Home," Dylan snapped. "Is Mrs. Thorne there?" Cole hesitated. I haven't heard from Mrs. Thorne, sir. I thought she was with you." Dylan pulled out his phone. He called her. Straight to voicemail. He checked the Find My app. Device offline. The car slid through the rainy streets of Manhattan. Dylan stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red. He wasn't scared yet. He was furious. When he got home, there would be a reckoning. He would cut her allowance. He would cancel her charity board seats. He would remind her who held the checkbook. But when the elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, the silence that greeted him wasn't the silence of an empty house. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. "Audrey?" He walked into the master bedroom. The bed was made. Her nightgown was laid out. But the closet? He threw open the doors to her walk-in wardrobe, a room larger than most Manhattan apartments. Everything was there. The Hermes Birkins, the Louboutins, the diamond necklaces in the safe. She hadn't taken a thing, not a single pair of socks. Dylan sat on the edge of the bed, loosening his tie. It didn't make sense. If she left him, she would have taken the jewelry. If she was kidnapped, there would be a ransom call. He poured himself a scotch and sat by the window, watching the city sleep. He fell asleep in the armchair, the crystal glass dangling from his fingers. He didn't know it yet, but while he slept, thousands of miles of fiber-optic cables under the Atlantic Ocean were lighting up. A code, written months ago, had just been executed. The red dress was a distraction. The real show was happening on the servers of the Cayman Islands. Tuesday morning broke with a grey, relentless drizzle. Dylan woke with a stiff neck and a headache that throbbed behind his eyes. He checked his phone. 6:30 a.m. Still no word from Audrey. He was about to call the police commissioner, a personal friend, to file a missing person report, convincing himself it was a kidnapping, when his phone rang. It wasn't the kidnappers. It was Marcus Sterling. Marcus was Dylan's former partner, the Steve Wozniak to Dylan's Steve Jobs, until Dylan had forced him out of the company 5 years ago in a hostile boardroom coup. They hadn't spoken since the day Marcus walked out of Thorne Dynamics with a cardboard box and a vow of revenge. "What do you want, Marcus?" Dylan rasped, rubbing his temples. "If you're calling to gloat about the stock price, save it. We're up 3 points. "Check again, Dylan," Marcus said. His voice was dry, devoid of emotion. "And then check your email." The line went dead. Dylan frowned. He walked over to his desk and tapped the spacebar on his iMac. The screen flared to life. He pulled up the Bloomberg terminal. He froze. Thorne Dynamics, ticker THDY, wasn't up 3 points. It was in free fall. In pre-market trading, the stock had plummeted 40%. The graph looked like a cliff edge. "What the hell?" Dillon muttered. He opened his email. His inbox was flooded. Messages from the board of directors, the SEC, the PR team. But at the top, flagged with high importance, was an automated notification from the bank. Subject: Security alert. Unusual activity from First Republic Private Wealth. Dillon clicked it. His eyes scanned the numbers, and for the first time in his life, he felt the physical sensation of his heart stopping. His primary liquidity account, which held $350 million, money earmarked for the acquisition of a rival AI firm in London, was empty. Balance: 0.2. He scrambled to log into his offshore accounts, the ones in the Cook Islands, the ones in Zurich. Access denied. Invalid credentials. "No," he whispered. "No, that's impossible. I have the biometrics. Only I have the biometrics." He grabbed his phone to call his CFO, but the phone rang in his hand before he could dial. It was Detective Inspector Sarah Miller of the NYPD Major Crimes Unit. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "We're in the lobby. We need to come up." "Thank God," Dillon said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and relief. "My wife has been taken, and someone has hacked my accounts. It's a coordinated attack." "Mr. Thorne," the detective said, and her tone shifted. It wasn't sympathetic. "We're not here about a kidnapping. We're here about the warrant." "Warrant? What warrant?" "The SEC and the FBI have issued a joint warrant for your arrest regarding insider trading, embezzlement, and the falsification of defense contracts." "And Mr. Thorne, the tip came from inside your house." Dillon dropped the phone. The elevator doors pinged. Detective Miller stepped out, flanked by 3 uniformed officers. She wasn't looking for Audrey. She was looking at Dillon like he was a bug under a microscope. "Where is she?" Dillon screamed, ignoring the officers, rushing toward Miller. "Where is my wife?" Miller stepped back, hand resting on her holster. "We don't know where your wife is, sir, but we have a statement she recorded 3 days ago. She's the whistleblower." The room spun. The floor seemed to tilt. Audrey, his quiet, obedient, trophy wife, the woman who asked for permission to buy a new dress, the woman who didn't understand the stock market. He remembered the nights she would sit in his office while he worked, quietly reading a book, sipping tea. He had spoken openly on conference calls in front of her. He had left documents on the desk. He had typed in passwords while she sat on the sofa. He thought she was invisible. He thought she was furniture. She doesn't know anything," Dillon stammered, backing away. "She's just a socialite." Detective Miller pulled a folder from her bag. She tossed it onto the glass coffee table. It slid across the surface, stopping inches from Dillon's hand. That folder contains 500 pages of encrypted logs, wire transfer receipts, and audio recordings of you bribing 3 senators, Miller said. She didn't just know Dillon. She was keeping the books. She's been building this case for 2 years. Dillon looked at the folder. On the cover, in Audrey's elegant, looping handwriting, was a sticky note. It read, "For the alimony, Zoxo." Dillon looked up, his face drained of blood. She took the money, the $350 million $. "We can't trace it," Miller said, almost sounding impressed. "It bounced through shell companies in Estonia, Panama, and Singapore before vanishing into a crypto tumbler. It's gone, Dillon, and frankly, considering the prison time you're looking at, being broke is the least of your problems." "She can't do this!" Dillon roared, smashing his fist against the wall. "She's a nobody. I made her." "It looks like she just unmade you," Miller replied calmly. "Dillon Thorne, you have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, cold, heavy steel against the Patek Philippe watch, Dylan realized the true horror of his situation. Audrey hadn't just left him. She hadn't just stolen his money. She had timed it perfectly. The gala, the public appearance, the alibi. She had vanished into thin air, leaving him holding the grenade she had pulled the pin on. But Dylan Thorne was a fighter. As they marched him out of his penthouse, past the swarming paparazzi that had mysteriously been tipped off to his arrest, his shock began to harden into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. He would get out of this. He would hire the best lawyers. And then he would find her. He didn't care about the money anymore. He didn't care about the company. He wanted to look her in the eyes one last time. But as the police cruiser pulled away, a block down, inside a nondescript coffee shop, a woman in a brunette wig lowered her newspaper. She watched the flashing lights fade into the distance. She took a sip of her black coffee, checked the notification on her burner phone, transfer complete, and smiled. Audrey Thorne was dead. The woman in the coffee shop was someone else entirely, and she had a plane to catch. To understand how Audrey Thorne dismantled an empire in a single night, you have to go back 2 years. You have to go back to a Tuesday in November, inside the master suite at 432 Park Avenue. It was their 5th anniversary. Dylan had forgotten, of course. He was on a conference call with a defense contractor in Tel Aviv, pacing the Persian rug, shouting about deliverables and acceptable collateral damage. Audrey sat on the edge of the bed, holding a small velvet box she had bought for him, a vintage compass from the 1920s, a symbol of guidance. When he finally hung up, he looked at her, his eyes glazed over with the dopamine hit of a closed deal. "What?" he barked, checking his emails. "Happy anniversary, Dylan," she said softly, extending the box. He didn't take it. He chuckled, a cold, dismissive sound. "Audrey, look at me. I just closed a $100 million deal. Do you really think I have the bandwidth for sentimental trinkets right now? Put it on the dresser. I'll open it later." He never opened it. The next day, the maid threw it in a drawer. That was the moment love died. And in the vacuum where love used to be, something colder and sharper began to grow. Dylan had made a critical error, one common among powerful men. He assumed Audrey's silence was vacancy. He assumed that because she had been a struggling art history major when he met her, she was incapable of understanding the complex machinations of his world. He was wrong. Before Audrey was an art student, she had spent 3 years at MIT. She had dropped out not because she couldn't handle the math, but because her mother got sick. She understood algorithms. She understood data flow. And most importantly, she understood patterns. The planning began that very night. It started with observation. Audrey became a ghost in her own home. She noticed that Dylan, despite his millions spent on cybersecurity, was lazy with his physical security. He felt untouchable in the penthouse. She watched him type his passwords. He didn't use a password manager for his black box, the encrypted server that held the illegal accounts. He typed it manually. It was long, complex, but he typed it with a rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap. One evening, while bringing him an espresso, she stood behind him. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at the reflection in the darkened window pane to his left. She saw the keystrokes. AEG, IS1982. Aegis, the name of his first company. 1982, the year he was born. An exclamation point. Pathetic, but the password was only the key. She needed the fingerprint. The biometric scanner on his laptop was military grade. You couldn't fake it with tape or gelatin. You needed the living pulse of the finger, or you needed the system to think the finger was there. For 6 months, Audrey played the role of the doting wife perfectly. She attended the dinners. She smiled at the insults. She let him grab her arm too hard in public. All the while, she was building a back door. She couldn't hack Thorn dynamics from the outside. Their firewall was a fortress. She had to do it from the inside. She used his ego against him. "Dylan," she said one night, feigning innocence, "my iPad is acting up. Can I check the tracking on my Sephora order on your laptop? The internet seems faster on yours." Dylan, drunk on scotch and arrogance, laughed. "Just don't touch the open windows, Audrey. I don't want you deleting a merger by accident." He unlocked the laptop with his thumb and slid it over to her. He watched her for a moment, then lost interest and turned back to the TV to watch the market recap. In that 60-second window, Audrey didn't check a Sephora order. She inserted a microscopic USB drive into the rear port of his laptop. It was a rubber ducky, a script injector she had bought on the dark web using Bitcoin she'd slowly siphoned from the grocery budget. The script didn't steal data. That would trigger the alarms. Instead, it cloned the session token of his admin privileges. It essentially told the main server, "Any command coming from this specific external IP address is coming from Dylan Thorn himself." She removed the drive. "Thanks, darling. It hasn't shipped yet." "Fascinating," he muttered, not looking at her. Over the next 18 months, Audrey didn't steal a cent. She simply watched. She accessed the black box remotely when he was asleep. She downloaded every PDF, every recorded call, every bribe paid to Senator Graham, every falsified safety report for the new missile guidance systems. She organized the files into folders labeled with innocuous names, like Yacht Renovations and Charity Gala Guest List. She learned about the shell companies. She learned that Dylan was leveraging the company's pension fund to cover bad bets in the derivatives market. She learned that if the stock dropped below a certain threshold, his margin loans would be called in, and he would lose everything. She realized she didn't just want to leave him. She wanted to obliterate him. She needed an accomplice, someone who could move the money once she triggered the trap. She couldn't trust anyone in New York. She found him in a chat room on an encrypted Tor network. User, cipher as 0. His real name was Elias Thorn, no relation to Dylan. Elias was a former forensic accountant for the IRS who had been fired for digging too deep into the wrong billionaire's taxes. He hated men like Dylan with a religious fervor. They communicated for a year without ever speaking. She sent him snippets of the ledger. He sent back the plan. "The money is in a daisy chain," Elias had typed. "If you try to transfer it directly, they'll freeze it. We have to make it look like a legitimate business transaction. We need to buy something." "Buy what?" she typed back. "A ghost company. I've set up a shell corporation in the Seychelles called Nebula Holdings. We will draft a fake acquisition contract. When you hit the button, Dylan's accounts will buy Nebula for $350 million. By the time the bank realizes Nebula doesn't exist, the money will be in Monero and scattered across 1,000 digital wallets. When do we do it? We need a distraction. A moment where Dylan is physically present but digitally blind. A moment where the world is watching him, so he can't be watching his phone." Audrey looked at the calendar. The Met Gala was 3 months away. "I have the date," she typed. The rain outside the Metropolitan Museum was coming down in sheets, blurring the city lights into a watercolor painting of neon and gray. Inside the black sedan waiting on 80th Street, Audrey Thorn ceased to exist. As the car pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the traffic, the woman in the back seat began to move with practiced efficiency. The adrenaline was hitting her now, a cold spike in her chest, but her hands remained steady. She stripped off the grey custodial uniform. Beneath it, she wore simple black leggings, a cashmere sweater, and worn-in sneakers. She pulled the brunette wig off, shaking out her natural hair, which was no longer the long, flowing blonde waves Dylan loved. 2 days ago, she had cut it short and dyed it a sharp raven black. She had worn extensions to the gala to hide it. Now, looking in the rearview mirror, she saw a stranger, a woman with a sharp bob and hard eyes. ETA to Teterboro is 25 minutes, Miss Vance, the driver said. Thank you, Cole, she replied. Cole wasn't just a driver. He was the head of Dylan's private security detail, a man Dylan had treated like a dog for 6 years. Dylan had underpaid him, mocked his PTSD from his time in Afghanistan, and threatened to fire him when he asked for time off to see his sick daughter. Audrey had paid for Cole's daughter's surgery 6 months ago. Cash. No questions asked. Cole would drive this car into a reservoir later tonight and disappear into Canada with a bag full of cash Audrey had left in the glove compartment. Audrey opened the laptop she had stashed under the seat. She connected to the car's encrypted Wi-Fi. 10:48 p.m. She logged into the First Republic portal. The cloned session token worked perfectly. The bank thought she was Dylan, sitting in his penthouse. She navigated to the pending transfers. The acquisition of Nebula Holdings was queued up. Authorize? Her finger hovered over the enter key. For a split second, she hesitated. Not out of guilt. Never guilt. But out of a sense of vertigo. This was the point of no return. Once she pressed this key, Dylan was dead. Not physically, but the Dylan Thorne the world knew would be erased. She thought of the anniversary. She thought of the coldness in his eyes. She thought of the way he looked through her, as if she were made of glass. Goodbye, Dylan, she whispered. She pressed enter. Transaction processing. Transaction complete. $350 million vanished from the account. She closed the laptop and smashed the hard drive with a small hammer she had brought for this exact purpose. She rolled down the window and tossed the pieces into the East River as they crossed the bridge. Meanwhile, in a sterile, fluorescent-lit room at the 19th Precinct, Dylan Thorne sat on a metal chair that was bolted to the floor. He was still wearing his $10,000 tuxedo, but the bow tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck like a noose. The room smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Detective Sarah Miller sat across from him. She wasn't rushing. She was enjoying this. I want my lawyer, Dylan said. His voice was hoarse. I want Alan Dershowitz. I want the best. Mr. Dershowitz isn't picking up, Dylan, Miller said, flipping through a file. And neither is your corporate counsel. It seems news travels fast. The stock dropped 60% in after-hours trading. Your board of directors just held an emergency vote via Zoom. You've been removed as CEO, effective immediately. Dylan stared at her, his mouth slightly open. That's illegal. They can't do that without a shareholder meeting. They can when the CEO is indicted for treason, Miller said. Treason? Dylan laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. I'm a defense contractor. I am the Patriot. Miller leaned forward. She placed a small digital recorder on the table. Recognize this? It was a sleek, silver voice recorder, the kind Dylan used to dictate memos. Miller pressed play. The voice that filled the room was Dylan's. It was clear, unmistakable. Look, Senator, I don't care if the guidance chips are failing in the desert heat. We patch the software to rig the test results. We ship the units, and we bill the Pentagon. If they fail in the field, we blame it on user error. Just make sure the oversight committee looks the other way, and there's another 50 grand in the Cayman account for you. Silence filled the interrogation room. Dylan's face went the color of ash. He remembered that conversation. It was taken in his study, late at night, 3 months ago. He was alone, or so he thought. Where? Dillon whispered. Where did you get that? Audrey, Miller said. She taped it to the underside of your desk. We found 6 more recorders, Dillon. In your car, in your office, sewn into the lining of your golf bag. Dillon slumped back in the chair. The magnitude of it was crushing him. She had been everywhere. She had been the air he breathed, and he hadn't even noticed she was poisoning him. She played me, he murmured. She played the long game. She didn't just play you, Dillon, Miller said, standing up and gathering her files. She beat you. And the worst part? She didn't do it for the money. She gave us the recording for free. She did it because she hated you. Miller walked to the door. Get comfortable, Mr. Thorne. The feds are on their way, and they don't have a sense of humor. 11:45 p.m., Teterboro Airport. The black sedan pulled up to the tarmac. A Gulfstream G650 was waiting, engines idling, a white beast in the rain. Audrey stepped out of the car. The wind whipped her new short hair across her face. A man was waiting by the stairs of the jet. He was tall, wearing a trench coat, his face obscured by the shadows. Everything is clear? Audrey asked. The flight plan is filed for Reykjavik, the man said. It was Elias. From there, we charter a new plane to Montenegro, non-extradition. Audrey nodded. She walked up the stairs. At the top, she turned back one last time to look at the skyline of New York City in the distance. Somewhere in those lights, Dillon was sitting in a cage. Somewhere in those lights, the life she had known for 10 years was burning to the ground. She felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't happiness. It was lighter than that. It was freedom. She stepped inside the cabin, and the heavy door sealed shut, locking out the world. Champagne, Miss Vance? The flight attendant asked. Audrey smiled. A real smile. No, she said. Water. I have a lot of work to do. The jet taxied down the runway and lifted off, piercing the cloud layer, rising above the storm, leaving the wreckage of Dillon Thorne far below in the dark. The Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in Lower Manhattan, is less than 5 miles from the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue. In a limousine with light traffic, it is a 12-minute drive. But for Dillon Thorne, the distance between those 2 points was the distance between godhood and purgatory. It had been 3 weeks since the gala. Dillon sat in a small, soundproofed visitation room. The walls were painted a suffocating shade of institutional beige. There were no windows, only a heavy steel door and a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed with the rhythmic persistence of a dying insect. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit. The fabric was coarse, irritating his skin, which had known only Egyptian cotton and cashmere for 2 decades. His hair, usually coiffed to perfection by a stylist who charged $400 a session, was grown out and greasy. He looked 10 years older. Across the metal table sat Harrison Ford. Harrison was the kind of lawyer who didn't advertise. You didn't find him on Google. You found him through a whisper network of senators and CEOs who had found themselves in complicated situations. He wore a navy Brioni suit and smelled of sandalwood and indifference. "It's not good, Dillon," Harrison said, arranging a stack of documents on the table. He didn't look at Dillon with pity. He looked at him like an accountant looking at a column of bad numbers. "Define not good," Dillon rasped. His throat was raw. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours a night since his arrest. The other inmates knew who he was. They knew he was the man who sold faulty guidance chips that killed soldiers. The guards had to put him in protective custody, which was just a polite term for solitary confinement. "The Southern District of New York is throwing the book at you," Harrison explained, tapping a document. "RICO charges, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States government, and insider trading. The recording Audrey provided, the one with Senator Graham, is admissible. It's a smoking gun, Dillon. Get it thrown out, Dillon snapped, a flash of his old arrogance surfacing. Fruit of the poisonous tree. She stole it. That's theft. Harrison sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. It doesn't work like that when she's a whistleblower, Dillon. She has immunity. And speaking of Senator Graham, he'll vouch for me, Dillon interrupted. I funded his re-election campaign. He's the godfather of my non-existent children. Harrison slid a transcript across the table. Senator Graham held a press conference this morning. He called you a rogue actor and a cancer on the military-industrial complex. He claims he was conducting a sting operation against you. He's turned state's evidence to save his own skin. Dillon stared at the paper. The words swam before his eyes. Rogue actor. And the assets? Dillon asked, his voice barely a whisper. The Cayman accounts? The Swiss vaults? Frozen, Harrison said. All of it. The DOJ seized the yacht in Monaco yesterday. The penthouse is being sealed. Even your personal checking account is locked. I'm currently working pro bono, Dillon, and my charity has a limit. Dillon closed his eyes. It was total. Absolute. Audrey hadn't just taken the $350 million liquid cash. She had exposed the rot in the foundation, causing the entire house to collapse. I want her found, Dillon said, opening his eyes. They were cold, hard stones. Dillon, focus on your defense. I want her found. Dillon slammed his fist on the table, the shackles rattling loudly. She is the key. If I can prove she manipulated the transfers, if I can prove she orchestrated the hack, I can frame this as corporate espionage. I can say she set me up. Harrison began packing his briefcase. She's gone, Dillon. The FBI can't find her. Interpol can't find her. She used a ghost network. She doesn't exist anymore. She exists, Dillon hissed. And she's sloppy. She thinks she's smarter than me because she won one round. But she has a weakness. And what is that? She likes nice things, Dillon said, a cruel smile touching his lips. She spent 10 years being Mrs. Dillon Thorne. She got used to the view. She won't be hiding in a hole in the ground. She'll be somewhere beautiful. Somewhere expensive. Harrison stood up. I have a plea deal on the table, Dillon. 20 years if you plead guilty to the fraud charges. If you go to trial, you're looking at life. Think about it. Harrison knocked on the door, and the guard buzzed him out. Dillon was left alone in the buzzing silence. He waited. He knew the routine. In 10 minutes, the guard would come to take him back to his cell. When the guard, a burly man named Officer Miller, no relation to the detective, opened the door, Dillon didn't get up immediately. Miller, Dillon said softly. Move it, Thorne, Miller grunted. I know you have a gambling debt, Miller, Dillon said, not looking at him. I know you owe $40,000 to a bookie in Queens. I heard you talking on the phone in the hallway last week. Miller froze. The heavy door hung open. What did you say? I can pay it off, Dillon said, turning to face him. And I can give you another $50,000 on top of it. Cash. Tonight. Miller took a step inside, checking the hallway to ensure no one was listening. You're broke, Thorne. Everyone knows it. My accounts are frozen, Dillon corrected. But I have assets that the FBI doesn't know about. A cold wallet. Bitcoin. Memorized the key phrase years ago. It was a lie. Dillon didn't have a secret Bitcoin wallet, but he knew how to move money he didn't have. He knew how to leverage future favors. What do you want? Miller asked, his voice low. I need a phone, Dillon said. A burner, 5 minutes. That's all. Miller hesitated, weighing his badge against his debt. The debt won. "Tonight," Miller whispered. "During the shift change, 2:30 a.m. That night, in the dark of his cell, huddled under the scratchy wool blanket, Dylan Thorne held a tiny, cracked smartphone. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call the bank. He dialed a number with a country code for Serbia. It rang 4 times. Then a voice answered, deep, distorted, heavy with a Slavic accent. "Yes?" "This is Zeus," Dylan said. It was his old code name from the black market arms dealing days. There was a pause. "Zeus is dead. It is all over the news." "I am very much alive," Dylan whispered. "And I have a job, a retrieval." "I do not work for credit," the voice said. "You will be paid in proprietary military tech," Dylan said. "Schematics for the new Poseidon drone system. I have them in my head. They are worth 50 million on the black market." The line crackled. The man on the other end was interested. "Who is the target?" "Her name was Audrey Thorne," Dylan said. "She has 350 million of my dollars. Find her, break her, and bring her to me." "And if she refuses?" Dylan stared at the concrete ceiling of his cell. "She won't refuse. Not when you tell her that I'm coming." The Adriatic Sea was a sheet of hammered turquoise. The sun beat down on the ancient stone terraces of Perost, a tiny, UNESCO-protected town in Montenegro. Audrey, now Eleanor Corves, sat on the patio of a secluded villa that clung to the cliffs overlooking the Bay of Kotor. The villa was a fortress of luxury, hidden behind high limestone walls and olive groves. It had cost 6 million euros, paid for through a shell company in Cyprus. She wore a white linen dress and oversized sunglasses. On the table next to her sat a glass of local rosé and an iPad. She was scrolling through the news. Former CEO Julian Thorne, denied bail, faces 150 years in prison. She stared at the photo of Dylan in his orange jumpsuit. It was the first time she had seen him look human. Not a titan, not a god, just a man. "You're obsessing again," a voice called out. Audrey swiped the screen off as Elias walked onto the patio. Elias, user, cipher, 0, looked nothing like the digital spectre he had been online. He was younger than she expected, maybe 28, with messy curls and a t-shirt that said NASA. He was holding a platter of fresh figs and prosciutto. "I'm not obsessing," Audrey lied. "I'm monitoring the situation. It's due diligence." Elias sat down, kicking his feet up on the stone railing. He plucked a fig and ate it with gusto. "He's buried, Audrey. We won. We pulled off the heist of the century. You need to learn how to be rich." Elias was adapting well. Too well. He had bought a bright yellow Lamborghini Urus that he drove too fast on the narrow coastal roads. He was tipping waiters with €100 notes. He was drawing attention. "We need to be careful, Elias," Audrey warned, sipping her wine. "We're not invisible. We're just hidden. There's a difference." "Who's going to find us?" Elias scoffed. "The FBI has no jurisdiction here. The money is washed so clean you could eat off it. We are ghosts." "Ghosts don't drive Lamborghinis," she countered sharply. Elias rolled his eyes, but he looked away. The dynamic between them had shifted. Online, they were equals. Here, in the flesh, the tension was palpable. They were two strangers bound together by a massive crime. They weren't lovers. They weren't quite friends. They were accomplices, sharing a gilded cage. Audrey stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace. The view was breathtaking. The mountains plunging into the sea, the church on the island of Our Lady of the Rocks floating in the distance. It was everything she had dreamed of when she was trapped in the penthouse. But she didn't feel free. Every time a boat slowed down near their dock, her heart hammered. Every time the phone rang, she flinched. She had phantom vibrations in her hand, expecting a text from Dylan demanding to know where she was. She had escaped the man, but she hadn't escaped the shadow. "I'm going into town," Elias said, standing up. "I need to buy cigarettes." "Take the Fiat," Audrey ordered. "Leave the yellow car here." "Fine, Mum," Elias muttered, grabbing the keys to the beat-up Fiat 500 they kept as a disguise. When he left, the silence of the villa was deafening. Audrey went inside. The interior was modern, minimalist, and cold. She walked to the kitchen to refill her water. On the marble island there was a vase. It was empty yesterday. Now it held a massive, elaborate bouquet of flowers. Dark, purple hydrangeas, white lilies and... Audrey stopped. Her breath hitched in her throat. In the center of the bouquet, standing tall and menacing, was a single black Baccara rose. It was a rare rose, the kind Dylan used to order for his office, the kind that looked almost like dried blood in the wrong light. "Elias," she called out, her voice trembling. "Did you buy these?" Silence. He was already gone. She walked toward the flowers. There was a small card tucked into the foliage. She didn't want to touch it. Her instincts, honed by 2 years of sleeping next to a predator, were screaming at her to run, to grab her emergency bag and flee. But she reached out. Her fingers brushed the velvet petals of the rose. She pulled the card out. It was heavy stock paper, cream-colored. She flipped it over. There was no message, no threat, no, "I found you." It was just a drawing, a simple, hand-drawn sketch in black ink. It was a sketch of a compass, the same vintage compass she had tried to give Dylan on their anniversary, the one he had thrown in a drawer, the one that was still sitting in the evidence locker of the NYPD, or so she thought. Audrey dropped the card. It fluttered to the floor like a dying leaf. Someone had been in the house. Someone knew about the compass. Only 2 people knew about that compass, her and Dylan. "He knows," she whispered to the empty room. She ran to the security panel on the wall. The system was armed. Green light. No breaches recorded. The cameras showed nothing but the swaying olive trees. Whoever had done this hadn't broken in. They had walked in. They had bypassed a military-grade security system that Elias, a genius hacker, had installed himself. Audrey grabbed her phone to call Elias. No service. She frowned. There was a cell tower right across the bay. She checked the Wi-Fi. Disconnected. A signal jammer. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. This wasn't a warning. This was an arrival. She heard a sound from the terrace, the scrape of a leather shoe on stone. Audrey spun around. Standing in the doorway, framed by the blinding Adriatic sunlight, was a man. He wasn't Dylan. He was huge, with a shaved head and a scar running through his left eyebrow. He wore a cheap leather jacket despite the heat. He smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "Mrs. Thorne," the man said. His voice was the same one Dylan had heard on the phone. "Or do you prefer Elena?" Audrey backed away, her hand fumbling behind her for a knife on the counter. She grabbed a heavy chef's knife. "Stay back," she screamed. The man didn't flinch. He just took a step inside. "Zeus sends his regards." Audrey lunged. She didn't hesitate. She wasn't the socialite anymore. She was a woman fighting for her life. But the man was a professional. He sidestepped her clumsy strike with lazy ease, grabbing her wrist and twisting it. The knife clattered to the floor. He shoved her back against the marble island. The impact knocked the wind out of her. "Where is the money, Elena?" the man asked calmly. "I don't have it," she gasped. "It's in the cloud. You can't access it without me." "Exactly," the man said. He pulled a syringe from his jacket pocket. "That is why you are coming with us. Dylan is very eager to have a family reunion." Audrey's vision blurred as she looked at the needle. Dylan found me. Just as the man moved to inject her, a loud crack echoed through the room. The man's eyes went wide. A small red dot appeared on his forehead. He slumped forward, collapsing onto the floor like a sack of cement. Standing behind him, in the doorway to the pantry, was Elias. He was holding a suppressed pistol. His hand was shaking violently, but his aim had been true. "Elias!" Audrey breathed, sliding down the cabinets to the floor. Elias stared at the dead body. He looked like he was going to be sick. I forgot my wallet," he stammered. "I came back. I saw the jammer on the gate." He looked up at Audrey, his face pale. "We have to go," Elias said. "Right now. If this guy is here, there are more. Dylan didn't just send a bounty hunter. He sent a hit squad." Audrey looked at the dead man, then at the black rose on the counter. Dylan was in a cage, thousands of miles away. But his reach was long. "We can't run," Audrey said, her voice hardening. She stood up, stepping over the body. She picked up the card with the compass on it. "What?" Elias asked, bewildered. "We have to run. We have to go to Thailand or—" "No," Audrey said. She ripped the card in half. "If we run, he'll chase us forever. He'll find us in Thailand. He'll find us on the moon." She looked at Elias, her violet eyes burning with a new, terrifying resolve. "He wants a war?" she said. "Fine. Let's give him one." "Audrey, he's in prison. What can we do?" "We don't go after him," Audrey said. "We go after the only thing he has left, the thing he's using to pay these people." "He has nothing. He has secrets," Audrey said. "He kept the schematics for the Poseidon drone in his head. That's his currency. We're going to find out who he's selling them to, and we're going to burn them down too." She walked past Elias, grabbing the car keys from his hand. "Get the laptop," she commanded. "We're going back to New York." The visitation room at the Metropolitan Correctional Center was cold, but the chill Dylan Thorne felt had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He sat handcuffed to the table, a smug grin playing on his lips. He was expecting his lawyer. He was expecting news that the package from Montenegro had been secured. He believed that even in a cage, he was the apex predator. The heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. Dylan's grin vanished. It wasn't his lawyer. She wore a simple black trench coat and oversized sunglasses. She pulled the glasses off, revealing violet eyes that no longer held a trace of fear. "Hello, Dylan." "Audrey," he breathed. The sound of her name felt foreign in his mouth. He scanned the room, looking for the guards, for the hitman, for anyone. How are you here? Did my men bring you?" "Your men are dead, Dylan," she said calmly, sitting down across from him. She didn't touch the table. She kept her hands in her pockets. "And I'm not here because I was caught. I'm here because I wanted to see you one last time." Dylan laughed, a jagged, nervous sound. "You're insane. You walked right into the lion's den. I'll scream for the guards. I'll tell them you're the fugitive." "Go ahead," Audrey challenged softly. "Tell them. But before you do, you should check the news." She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Dylan looked down. It was a printout of a Washington Post headline from an hour ago. "Leaked, Thorne Dynamics Poseidon. Drone blueprints uploaded to public domain." Dylan's face went white. The blood drained from his lips so fast, he looked like a corpse. "The Poseidon schematics," Audrey said, her voice devoid of pity. "The currency you were using to pay for your hit squads, the secrets you kept in your head." "Impossible," Dylan stammered. "I never wrote them down. Only I knew the encryption keys." "You typed them once," Audrey corrected him. 3 years ago, on a flight to Dubai. You thought I was asleep next to you. I wasn't. I have a photographic memory, Dylan. You always forgot that about me. You were so busy looking at yourself in the mirror, you never noticed I was watching you." She leaned forward. "I uploaded them to every whistleblower site on the planet this morning. The tech is worthless now. Your buyers in Serbia, they're not coming for me. They're coming for you, because you promised them something you no longer own." Dylan began to shake. The walls were closing in. He realized with terrifying clarity that his last lifeline had been cut. "I also sent the chat logs from your burner phone to the FBI," Audrey added, standing up. "They know you ordered a hit from inside federal prison. Do you know what that means? It means ADX Florence, the Supermax, 23 hours a day in a concrete box, buried under the Colorado Rockies. No phone, no visitors, no way out." "Audrey, please," Dylan begged, the facade crumbling completely. Tears welled in his eyes. "Don't leave me here. I have money hidden. I can give you half." "I don't want your money, Dylan. I took it to break you, not to keep it," she said. She turned to the door. "Audrey," he screamed, straining against the cuffs. "Who are you?" She stopped, hand on the heavy steel latch. She looked back over her shoulder. "I'm the wife you underestimated." She knocked on the door. The guard opened it. Audrey walked out into the corridor, the heavy thud of the door sealing Dylan's fate behind her. Outside, the New York air was crisp and smelling of rain. Elias was waiting in a nondescript sedan down the block. Audrey got in. "It's done?" Elias asked. "It's done," she said. "Where to now?" Audrey looked at the map on the dashboard. The world was wide. "Drive," she said. "Just drive." And that is the story of Dylan and Audrey Thorne. In the end, Dylan didn't lose his empire because of a stock market crash or a bad business deal. He lost it because he failed to see the person standing right next to him. He mistook silence for weakness and patience for submission. Dylan Thorne now resides in ADX Florence, serving 3 consecutive life sentences. He has not spoken a word since the day Audrey visited him. As for Audrey, no one knows where she is. Some say she's in Tokyo, others say she's running an art gallery in Paris under a new name. But one thing is certain, she is free. This story serves as a brutal reminder. The most dangerous enemy you will ever have is not the one shouting at the gates, but the one quietly pouring your tea. Wow, what a ride. That was the story of the $350 million vanishing act. I want to know what you think. Was Audrey justified in destroying his life? Or did she go too far? Let me know in the comments below. Type Team Audrey or Team Dylan. If you enjoyed this deep dive into corporate betrayal and revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And hit subscribe with the notification bell on so you never miss a story like this. I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe and watch who you trust.